you don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look at better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 5th part of What If Deku Finds Powerpuff Girls in MHA. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of PeriwinkleFrog on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Present Mike shouted before counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2. Blossom glared defiantly, gritting her teeth. Let's do this. 1, go, go, go. After he said this, a blaring alarm went off, which in turn set off a stampede of students towards the doorway. As they made it through the hallway that led outside to the course, the hallway became unbelievably crowded. What once used to be an uncrowded sight of the end beyond was now a vision filled with jostling P uniforms and pushing arms. The obstacles hadn't even started yet, and there was already trouble. But Blossom was prepared. After crouching for a short moment, Blossom propelled herself up so that she was floating above everyone's heads. And without hesitation, she flew towards the end of the hallway past stunned students and blasted herself into the lead. And off we go, y'all, Present Mike announced. We're starting off this race with a bang. As you can see, folks, Class 1A's Momoko Utonium, one of the legendary Wonder Girls of UA, quickly takes the lead with her pink flying streaks. Talk about stealing the show. But shortly after Blossom took the lead, Todoroki followed a few seconds after. And as the two made it out of the hallway, Todoroki aimed his hand at the ground behind him. Suddenly, a wave of ice blasted out of his hand, freezing the ground behind him. Immediately, some of the students got trapped in the ice, to their shock and chagrin. Oh snap, would you look at that? Another student of Class 1A, Shototodoroki, slips up everyone with his ice. Literally, looks like some of the contenders in this race are gonna face a huge setback, Present Mike shouted. After he did that, Todoroki pursued Blossom, who looked back with shock. Once she did, Todoroki sent an ice blast her way. And while she is able to dodge by ducking, she ends up landing on the ground, allowing Todoroki to overtake her. And Shototodoroki takes the lead from Momoko, Present Mike hollered over cheers. Blossom glared. She wasn't going to give up that easily. As she runs after him, more students move around the ice barrier in various ways. Bubbles and Buttercup fly out, while Aoyama uses his naval laser to propel him forward. Bakugou uses his explosions to fly away, and Yaoyorozu creates a pole that she uses to avoid the ice. But hold your breath, folks. These two WizKids in the lead have some competition. Many students are avoiding Todoroki's ice show and taking the setback in stride. It's gonna take a lot more to knock down these guys. Bubbles grinned as she landed on the ground and started running. She was in 5th place, but now she was looking to move up a few spots. It's my turn now, she declared. After she said that, Bubbles stuck out her hand, and instantly her bubble wand materialized. Quickly, she swung it, and large bubbles came out, floating above people's heads. She then jumped towards one of the bubbles, before bouncing off of it like a trampoline. It's time for the bubble bounce, she declared as she soared through the air. And with that, she landed on another bubble, only to bounce off of that one onto another one. Soon, Bubbles is ricocheting her way past her rivals, before jumping high enough to clear the heads of the rest and landing in first. Bakugou clearly didn't like this, as he gaped with an eye twitching as he ran. That can't be allowed. She used a weapon, didn't she? Weapons aren't allowed, he shouted. As if on cue, Present Mike's voice rang out. In a bubbly turn of events, Class 1A's Miyako Utonium takes first place after using the help of bubbles created by her weapon to send her past her opponents. And yes, y'all, I checked with regulators. The move is allowed, as she is using purely her power and not a solid weapon. However, they advise not to use the move again before it is classified as a rule breaker. Bubbles shrugged as the wand disappeared in a shower of tiny bubbles. Hey, whatever, I'm still in the lead. Not for long, you're not. The shout belonged to Minta of Class 1A, as he moved across with incredible speed. This was because he was using his quirk, which were removable purple balls on his head that he could take off and throw, allowing him to bounce off of them in a maneuver similar to Bubbles' bubble bounce. Mynta then launched himself into the air over Bubbles, 2 balls in his hands ready to aim. "Take this, pigtails," he shouted. But before he could make another move, a sudden attack from an unknown aggressor sends Mynta flying back, all the way to last place. Once this happened, everyone stopped in confusion and surprise. Shadows of varying sizes blocked their paths, and once the light shone on them, it became clear what they were. "All right, we made it to the first obstacle of the race, and I know that this will take y'all on a trip down memory lane. You know you love 'em, it's the exam robots." Sure enough, there they were. A group consisting of entrance exam robots. But unlike the entrance exam, there was an army of them. And, to people's shock and dread, many zero-pointer arena traps were among them. It was official. Yua wasn't messing around with this race. Bubbles stepped back timidly. Oh no. Bubbles wasn't the only one to look intimidated. In fact, most students looked apprehensive, even fearful, to attack the approaching robots. But soon, one student took initiative. Suddenly, more ice surrounded Todoroki before he blasted forward, sliding across a wave of ice he created. He then released another onslaught of ice, which reached high into the sky as an ice cliff and completely froze one arena trap. Once it froze, it then fell over, the impact creating a blizzard-like shockwave that pushed some students back. "Whoa, would you look at the power? An impressive feat from shototodoroki," Present Mike complimented. As Todoroki started to race past the zero-pointer's corpse, more started to come his way. But suddenly, one had its chest punctured by a zooming green light. Buttercup had taken the liberty of destroying the remaining arena traps. She was flying fast and using the momentum, along with her sheer strength, to blast through the chests of arena traps, similar to how she had done with her sisters when using the bullet formation attack on the entrance exam arena trap. Only, she was doing this on her own without the help of her sisters. But, it turns out, Kaoru Utonium of Class 1A's not looking to give Todoroki the spotlight. "She's tearing through these robots like paper," Present Mike screamed. But that spelled out bad news for the rest, as robot debris started to fall right towards them. Some quickly jumped out of the way, but others weren't as lucky. One of the unlucky ones was Bubbles, as a colossal arena trap came crashing down onto her. Fortunately, as she bursted out from underneath it, her power allowed her to be completely invincible, and she came out without a scratch. Before a zero-pointer could fall on Blossom, she incinerated it into ash with a large pink energy blast. Through the ash, she could see Buttercup slightly veering away from the direction she's supposed to go in, killing robot after robot with a trigger-happy grin. Classic Buttercup. The amount of robots to destroy was distracting her from her true objective, which was to finish the race. But, as she set off, Blossom wasn't concerned about robots, when first place was just within her grasp. But soon, it became apparent that she wasn't the only one who wanted that. As Blossom ran with her super speed, someone followed closely behind, namely, Todoroki sliding on another ice wave. And here we have it. 2 Class 1A students neck to neck for first place. It's official. Class 1A is truly the stars of the show, Present Mike declared. As the two locked eyes, Blossom glared in determination with a smirk. "Looks like he's not giving up easily. Well, neither am I." That was when Blossom decided to double her speed, running faster than the ice wave. But Todoroki wasn't letting up, as he manipulated the ice so that it launched him into midair, allowing him to soar faster through the air and create another ice wave to jump on that was closer to Blossom. "Og, the suspense is killing me. Who's gonna win?" Present Mike hollered. After he said that, Blossom looked away from Todoroki, only for her eyes to widen and for her to stop running and skid to a stop. And fortunately, she was able to stop herself from plunging off a cliff. Todoroki slowed as well, jumping off the ice wave and stumbling to a stop at the edge of the cliff. Together, the two looked at the sight in front of them, which was an expansive canyon with stone pillars and cables in between each one. "And here we are at our second pit stop. Emphasis on the pit," Present Mike announced. "Here, competitors must try their best to cross the canyon, either on the cables or some other rule-abiding way. All you gotta not do is simple. Don't fall. That's why it's called the fall." Blossom looked down at the seemingly endless drop, before looking up. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see Todoroki do the same thing she was doing, gauging the distance and how to get across easily. And as their eyes met, that was when time seemed to unfreeze and the high-paced adrenaline came rushing back. When it came to easy methods of getting across, the way to go was obvious: flight. Which was why Blossom didn't hesitate to fly off in a pink blur, making her way across the canyon. Todoroki followed immediately afterwards, using his ice to get across. As others came to the canyon, they used various ways of getting across, such as Tsuyu using her frog-like speed and movement to clear the cables, while Tenya used the engines on his legs to jet himself across. Bubbles meanwhile decided to do this the fun way. After crouching, Bubbles made a big leap into the air, soaring high above everyone's heads. Then, using her power, she flew quickly back down to land on a pillar before launching herself again, jumping from pillar to pillar in rapid succession. While Bubbles leapt through the air, Buttercup finally came up to the fall. But instead of going across, Buttercup looked at some of the ropes, with people still crossing on them. An idea was starting to form in her head. With a wicked grin, Buttercup grabbed as many cables as she could and started to shake them violently. The resulting ripple of jostling ropes dislodged competitors, making some of them fly in the air while others fell onto the rock pillars. "Whoa, looks like y'all better watch out, 'cause Kaoru isn't coming to play," Present Mike hollered. Once a sufficient number of students were set back, Buttercup finally flew across, sticking out her curled tongue at some players on rock pillars, glaring and cursing her out. Once the fall was cleared, Blossom landed and started to run again. But as she heard the crackling sound of ice behind her, she groaned. "Does this guy ever quit?" she muttered to herself. Not bothering to look at Todoroki in hot pursuit, Blossom ran faster to pull farther ahead. But her urge to get away seemed to fog her awareness of surroundings as her foot stepped into a shallow ditch. So 1 second, Blossom was running. The next, a huge explosion of pink smoke sent her reeling and falling on the ground. And although she was unscathed, she was very disoriented. Whoops! Looks like Momoko stumbled right onto the third and final obstacle of the race. You might want to watch your step, contestants, because here, we have a minefield. At this, Blossom blinked in bewilderment and indignation. "Minefield? Are they trying to kill us?" she muttered. Slowly Blossom stood up and looked across the expansive area. In the devoid field, there were almost infinite small and barely noticeable ditches dug in the mud. And inside those ditches were blinking discs, which were most likely the landmines. But with bad news, there was also good news. Blossom could see the stadium up ahead. The finish line was just beyond the obstacle. Too bad that obstacle was full of bombs ready to explode. Just like the fall, Blossom resorted to flight, just as other students came up. As for those who couldn't fly, they moved around the field with the daintiness and caution of a mouse, trying not to step on a bomb that could absolutely hurt them. The next Powerpuff Girl to make it to the minefield was Buttercup, who came in after Todoroki set off. She also decided to fly across for an easy win. But as she made it a quarter of a way through, a sudden explosion knocked her off balance. As she fell on her butt, she coincidentally fell onto another bomb, which exploded underneath her. "Ooh-oh," Present Mike hissed. "That's gonna leave a mark on Kaoru for sure." As Buttercup stumbled upwards, rubbing her head despite not feeling any pain, she then saw what happened. A student that came in behind her had not liked the fact that she was ahead, and as a result, the contestant used his emitter quirk to send a blast towards a landmine underneath Buttercup, causing the explosion. And with Buttercup distracted, that allowed the boy to race by with a glare. "That's what you get for knocking me off the rope, loser," he shouted as he made his way past. Buttercup glared and gritted her teeth. Clearly, she wasn't going to let this slide. That was why she grabbed a nearby disc, quickly aimed, and threw it like a frisbee. This caused the mine to land by the boy's feet and blow up, sending him and others around him flying. "Loser my ass," Buttercup growled as she continued running. Meanwhile, Bubbles was clearing the minefield as well. Before going onto it, she had enveloped herself into a glowing energy construct of a bubble. Then, she rolled by on the minefield like a hamster, unaffected by any surrounding explosions. But Bubbles wasn't going to be unbothered for long. That was evidenced by Bakugou blasting up to her and shoving the bubble out of the way. "Move it, Bug Eyes," he shouted as he passed by. Bubbles, shocked by the sudden maneuver and insult, quickly grew irritated. An idea coming to her, Bubbles jumped, and in turn, the bubble jumped too. Once she landed, she immediately rocketed into the air, propelled by the bounciness of the bubble. As she flew over Bakugou's head, she then glared at him as he looked up, bewildered. "Stop calling me that," she shouted. After she said that, Bubbles pushed on the bottom of the bubble, which caused it to fly straight towards Bakugou. But he quickly turned around and threw one of his explosions at the bubble. This stopped Bubbles' attempted attack, and burst the bubble around her into tiny flickers of blue. But it was revealed that that was Bubbles' plan all along. After the bubble exploded, Bubbles' foot had pressed onto Bakugou's outstretched hand. Using her momentum and the prop, Bubbles pushed off, doing a twist flip over him and landing on the other side. With a dorky salute and an equally dorky smile, Bubbles raced ahead. "Now that's a maneuver we gotta zero on really quick," Present Mike gasped. Katsuki Bakugou of Class 1A had been trying to land an attack on Miyako Utonium, also of Class 1A. But not only did she take the attack in stride, but she also used it to her advantage to push ahead of him. That's top-level strategy right there. Bakugou stared in shock for a second before snapping out of it. He then glared hard, screamed in fury, and raced after her. "That brat's always showing off. I'll kill her," he shouted. Not far ahead of the pair, almost at the end of the minefield, Blossom hit the ground. But instead of falling flat, Blossom did a tuck and roll, landing in a crouch. She then touched the right side of her face, which felt cold and icy, which was expected since Todoroki had just aimed a barely missed ice blast at her, and the attack grazed her face. As Blossom stood up, Todoroki pushed past her, starting to get onto the small hill leading up to the stadium. She didn't hesitate to start running after him, quickly catching up to him. Now, the two were side by side, heading towards the finish line and in a deadlock for first place. Fighting off attacks and attempts made by Todoroki to deter her, Blossom fixed her eyes wildly on the entrance of the stadium. This was it. The first event of the sports festival came down to this. Winning this would make a statement to everyone watching that she had more than enough skill and determination to ace the sports festival. Right now, the one thing standing in between that was Todoroki. But then, as she heard the loudest explosion behind her, she realized that maybe he wasn't the only one. Blossom looked behind her to see something green hurtling towards them. It then landed a few feet away before it started to barrel towards them. Looking at it, she frowned. What was that? But then, as it came close and took the lead from a shocked Blossom and Todoroki, it was clear who it was. "Izuku!" Blossom shouted in bewilderment and irritation. Sure enough, Izuku was running up the hill towards the stadium. But despite the strong start, he seemed to be losing his momentum. This allowed the two to race past him, their passion and urgency pushing them forward. But Izuku wasn't done, as he grabbed what looked like a metal sheet, positioned it behind his head, jumped up, and slammed it into the ground. The resulting chain of explosions sent dust flying everywhere, directly towards Blossom and Todoroki. This forced them to stop and cough from the dust as Izuku continued to run. Through her watery eyes, Blossom could see Izuku's retreating form as he came closer and closer towards the stadium. He was taking the win from both of them. No, this couldn't be the end, could it? She couldn't lose like this. She would take second or third place and be known as the girl who really tried but wasn't good enough to win. Leaders don't lose. She doesn't lose. No, no, no. What happened afterwards, Blossom couldn't figure out. All she knew was that something inside her snapped. Not minding the dust at all, Blossom jetted out of it, flying like she never had done during this race. She then started to move in a corkscrew motion as the stadium came in closer and closer. "Bullet formation," she shouted. In a gust of wind, she blasted past Izuku just as he came to the entrance, the force making him stop and protect his face with his arms. After a split second, Blossom had the sense to shut her eyes and dig her feet into the ground. But her momentum dragged her along, making skid marks on the stadium floor, before stopping in the middle of it. Panting from the exertion, Blossom unclenched her fist. Her heart was beating rapidly, like it was about to burst. It didn't appear to be because of the tiredness or lack thereof, but it seemed like it was as it slowly slowed. Only then did she open her eyes. Around her, Blossom could see people in the stands staring at her with shock. Even some of the pro heroes looked like they were thrown for a loop. For the first time at the sports festival, the stadium was dead silent. But that was soon broken by Present Mike as he announced something that made Blossom do a double take. And our winner for the obstacle race is Momoko Utonium. At this, loud applause shook the stadium as people whooped and cheered. Blossom now looked completely nonplussed as she whirled around and looked at the entrance. Izuku followed afterwards and took second place, while Todoroki took third. They were then followed by Buttercup, Bubbles, and Bakugou, who all took the last 3 spots as the top 6. As others trickled in, Present Mike said more, but Blossom was barely listening. She could hardly believe it. She was first. But as her sisters barreled into her, taking her into a hug and congratulated her excitedly, it felt all the more real, and it was all the more real. A few minutes had passed since the completion of the obstacle race. Once everyone had made it into the stadium, the moderators immediately slotted them onto a leaderboard. But Blossom didn't need the leaderboard. She knew that she won. It was hard to forget when swarms of people were congratulating you. Blossom didn't even seem to react to it. That was because it all felt like some sort of weird fever dream, from the blaring cheers and noises to the friendly faces. But every time her sisters hugged her, or every time a student came up and shook her hand respectfully, she was once again reminded that it wasn't a dream. Soon, everyone gathered around to look at the newly posted leaderboard on the huge screen in the stadium. And at the top, of course, were the words #1 Momoko Utonium. Underneath were rows and columns of different names, signifying different placements in the race. But soon, people noticed 2 things about the board. For one, there were numbers next to their names on the leaderboard, with Blossom Momoko having the largest number. And secondly, only the top 45 people in the race were on the leaderboard. And as evidenced by Midnight's next announcement, there was an explanation for this. Now people, as we come out of our first event of the festival, we're also coming across our first rankings. As you can see, there's a leaderboard of where you placed in terms of the race's outcome. But if you can't seem to find your place on the board, that means one thing. It means that you have placed below 45th place and are now eliminated, which means that you are prevented from moving on to the next event. At this, some students went into an uproar of shock and despair. Meanwhile, Bubbles gaped. "What? There's eliminations in this thing," she exclaimed. Buttercup shrugged. "Of course there is. This whole festival is for showing that you're the best. They're not gonna let some lamios stay when they can't even keep up with a little race." At this, some eliminated students who were nearby gave Buttercup death stares. And of course, Buttercup wasn't bothered and shot back a withering glare of her own. "Besides," she sighed as some of the students moved away, "why are you bothered? We got the top spots. We're good." Blossom nodded. "Buttercup's right. The matter of others getting eliminated is none of our concern now. If we want to show the world who we are, we gotta focus on that and only that." Bubbles' eyebrows furrowed, but relented nonetheless. "I guess so." Once all of the eliminated people left the stadium, Midnight talked again. "As for the rest of you, congrats. You're now officially moving on to the second event. Give yourselves a pat on the back. But just know, it'll be harder from here on out. Especially when there's high stakes for the guys in the lead." After she said this, the points next to people's names on the leaderboard came into more focus, most notably Blossom's points. "Now, to address what these numbers mean and the rules of our next event," Midnight declared. "For the next event, we're doing a cavalry battle. The rules, like the race, are simple. People are going to split into teams of no less than 3 and no more than 4, and are assigned point values, which, as you're starting to see, ties into the leaderboard. The last place runner has 5 points as the spots scale up, so do the points by 5. So, the first place runner, in this case Miss Utonium, has the most points, 10 million. But don't think you're safe because you have more points. It's quite the opposite. You're the most vulnerable. The goal of this exercise is for teams to defend their collective points and steal from others. So if a team consisting of low-tier students happens to steal from Momoko's team, they'll be set for first. So buckle in, for those of you at the top, because any little steal can send you tumbling into last place." Just like that, Blossom's excitement about placing first dissolved as quickly as air leaving a popped balloon. Slowly, she saw that other contestants were starting to look her way with borderline menacing and smug faces, as they fully understood the advantage they had over her. What once were supportive and friendly competitors were now seemingly hungry sharks out for blood. And for the first time at the sports festival, Blossom felt like she was a few minutes away from fainting. If Midnight noticed the look of terror on Blossom's face, she didn't seem to care as she continued her peppy speech. So, if there aren't any questions, go ahead and build your team. And you better hurry 'cause you got 15 minutes to do so, she finished with a flourish. Once that was established, everyone scrambled to get a team. And surprisingly, everyone came to Todoroki. Hey, let me on your team. We can do some great stuff together. Shoto, just join me. Join us. We'll guarantee you a spot in the final event. As everyone crowded around him, the girls slightly moved away. Why is everyone trying to join up with Todoroki? Bubbles asked. Blossom narrowed her eyes, calculating. I think it's because he has a perfect score. With 200 points, he has a sufficient amount of points, while not having a too high score. That way, not many people will go for him in battle. Buttercup hissed through her gritted teeth, and for a moment, she looked the tiniest bit apprehensive. Yeah, but they'll go for you, won't they? I mean, you got 10 million. That's huge. Blossom sighed. Yeah, you think I don't know that? I might as well be throwing myself to wolves. Bubbles turned to her, surprisingly determined as she curled her fists. Have hope, Blossom. It's not a sure thing that they'll get your points. This is a good thing. Just as long as you keep your points for the duration of the battle, you'll definitely get first place. You don't even have to steal from anyone. Blossom mulled it over before saying, That's a good point. Buttercup looked at other contestants, some already in teams. That could work. That is, if you can find some hell of a powerful teammates to defend you. Blossom shrugged. I'm sure it wouldn't hurt to try. But as she set off towards some people not in teams, they quickly spotted her and moved away. Blossom frowned before going to another group of unclaimed teammates, only for the same thing to happen. After a good minute of asking, pursuing, and being dodged, it was clear why people were avoiding Blossom like the plague. They wanted to keep the few precious points they have, and to not be jeopardized in the case of Blossom losing her points. Clearly, they didn't trust her enough to carry their team and seemed to think that she would be the reason if they were to lose. In short, they were underestimating her again. Ouch. Finally, when the timer came down to 1 minute and 30 seconds, Blossom had enough and stopped pestering other participants. Instead, she groaned and kicked at the ground harshly. Is it too much to ask for one of these people to join my team? I mean, come on, Blossom muttered under her breath. As she looked down at the ground, Bubbles and Buttercup walked up to her, looking the slightest bit amused. Any luck, Captain? Buttercup asked. Blossom whined as she put her head into her hands. Yes, actually, things are going very well. Thank you for asking, she growled, her tone thick with sarcasm. Bubbles looked around, puzzled. Then where are the teammates? I don't see them. Blossom swung her head up with a glare. Gee, Bubbles, you don't say. Buttercup clicked her tongue. All right, knock it off with the sarcasm, Miss Attitude. Since you are clearly failing to get any buddies to join your group, just join up with us. How does that sound, huh? Blossom furrowed her eyebrows, slightly lifting her upper lip into a grimace. I mean, sure. But would it be better if we went to separate teams? After all, you guys would have a much better chance at making it to the finals without my stupid points jeopardizing your scores. Buttercup frowned while her mouth parted in a genuinely offended look. I don't know what fact is more ridiculous, the fact that you suggested we split up the Powerpuff Girls, or the fact that you really think any person here has a chance of snatching your points and winning. Both. Both are equally ridiculous, and stupid too. Bubbles chimed bluntly. Blossom glared defensively, her jaw dropping. Well, sorry I'm concerned about you two not making it to the finals. I guess I should just not care about your fates in this festival, Blossom snapped. Just then, Buttercup seized Blossom's shoulders and shook her a tiny bit. Bloss, do you even hear yourself? You're talking as if we're not superpowered fighting machines, she hollered. At this outburst, a few people around them stared at them before slowly moving away. Blossom, after glancing at them, sighed. Well, that's one way to fuel people's suspicions that we're high-tech robot spies acting as humans to infiltrate Yua. Buttercup scoffed. Like I give a shit about that baseless conspiracy theory. The point is that you need to wake up and snap out of that mindset you're in right now. Let me explain it to you nice and slow. We are the Powerpuff Girls. You are our leader. We kick villain butt almost every day of our lives. We have super cool and awesome powers, and our fighting style is tailored for team and not solo combat. Now, as you keep these things in your mind, I want to ask you, in a competitive team event where superpowers are allowed and where your competitors are people that you placed above in the race before this, how high do you think your chances are at winning? Bubbles lit up and waved her hand in the air. Oh, I know, our chances are very high. Buttercup nodded. Ding, ding, ding. Real freaking high. Let that sink in. Now that that's settled, I'm going to ask you again. Do you want me and Bubbles to join your team so that we can absolutely dominate this game and make it to the finals? Yes or no? Blossom raised an eyebrow, a smile playing at her lips. Okay, you want the Powerpuff Girls together? You got it. Buttercup smiled as well before letting go. Good. Glad you still have some of your senses. After she said that, a horn blared throughout the stadium, signifying that the wait time had ended. And time's up, Midnight announced. All right, teams, get into the position and the game will start shortly. Quickly, the girls mobilized into their cavalry positions, Buttercup standing in front, Bubbles standing in the back, and Blossom seated on Buttercup's and Bubbles' linked arms. Blossom then tied the points banner into a headband as instructed, tightening it with a confident grin. You ready, girls? Blossom shouted. Ready, Buttercup and Bubbles shouted in unison. Finally, as everyone got into position, Midnight waved her whip, making a resounding snap. Begin. As the word registered, nearly everyone bolted from their spots, all of them racing towards the girls with eagerness. On my signal, Blossom yelled as they stepped back. Bubbles and Buttercup nodded, tensing up. And as the first team, Todoroki's team, got within a close distance of them, Blossom finally spoke again. Now. Suddenly, the Powerpuff Girls rocketed into the air, fueled by Buttercup and Bubbles jumping in unison. As they soared over people's heads, they landed in a clear spot effortlessly. Get to running, Blossom demanded as the teams scrambled to change their course. Roger, Bubbles and Buttercup replied. And so, the girls were off, zooming around the arena and dodging teams in their way. But a short moment passed before they were stopped in their tracks suddenly. As Blossom lurched, she tried to steady herself with wide eyes. What's going on? She asked. Meanwhile, a chorus of groans and exclamations came from Bubbles and Buttercup as they frantically moved around. It's our feet! They're stuck in the ground! Bubbles exclaimed. It's like the ground melted or something, Buttercup added exasperatedly. As Blossom looked down, she saw that her sisters were right. Their feet were trapped in some sort of quicksand, rendering them frozen. Just then, she heard a cackle, prompting Blossom to look up with wide eyes. Tetsu's team were right in front of them, and one of the teammates was touching the ground, making the ground around Blossom's team distorted and liquidized. It's a quirk, Blossom cried in surprise. With a wily grin, Tetsu shouted, Get them! At his words, the team surged towards the girls as they tried to get out. But as Tetsu reached out for the headband, Blossom glared and swung her hand. In a flash, a pink energy blast pushed the team back, deflecting their attempt to snatch the headband. Although it wasn't a strong offensive maneuver, it granted Bubbles and Buttercup enough time to free themselves. Quickly, the girls flew backwards, away from the quicksand. As they ran backwards, though, Blossom suddenly felt her headband sliding up and off her head. And as she lost the headband, she saw Bakugou's face grinning evilly back at her as his team ran off, leaving them in the dust. As they stopped, it didn't take long for Blossom to register what happened. Bakugou's team had stolen the headband, and therefore they had lost their points. No, she shouted. Shit, that asshole stole our points? Buttercup screamed. Oh God, oh God, oh God, Bubbles whispered. Well, don't just stand there, let's get those points back, Blossom snapped. Quickly, the girls ran after Bakugou's team. But just as they started running, Bakugou's team disappeared into the mass of teams. What previously had been a synchronized pursuit towards the girls had devolved into a crazy free-for-all scramble for points of any kind, as frenzied hands snatched headbands. As the girls pushed past other teams, Blossom searched the crowd, and after a few seconds, she found them. "Over there, let's go," she shouted. After she said that, she could feel Buttercup and Bubbles push forward, evading teams in the way, straight towards Bakugou's team. As they got closer and closer, Blossom prepared to reach out and snatch the headband from behind. But just as her fingers grazed the silky headband, it immediately got snatched by someone else. As she registered what happened, Blossom yelped with wide eyes and the girls skidded to a stop. Meanwhile, Bakugou's team turned around as they realized that the headband was stolen, to Bakugou's rage. Immediately, his furious eyes landed on Blossom, who didn't bother to look at him as her eyes landed on the true perpetrator. It was Izuku and his team, and the headband was stolen by Takoyami's dark shadow. "Izuku? Deku?" As Izuku turned his head towards the two indignated teams, he looked almost terrified yet confident as his team sped up. They flashed along the arena almost as quickly as the girls were. "How the hell are they moving so fast?" Buttercup yelled. With a few seconds of analysis, Blossom deduced the cause. Ochako's quirk is making them more light on their feet and lessening their gravity. Not to mention the load of equipment they have provided by one of the support students. "Equipment? Awa, how are we gonna compete with that?" Bubbles whined. Buttercup glared. "You better not mean that. Some scraps of screws and bolts is not much to compete with when you have our skill. I don't care what Deku has on his team, we're gonna beat him." Suddenly, the girls were shoved to the side by Bakugou's team surging past. Bakugou's eyes looked wild as they sprinted towards Izuku's team, and to everyone's surprise, Bakugou got up and leapt off of his teammate's arms, blasting into the air like a rocket missile. "Die!" he roared, charging up an explosion to throw. Before the attack could land, a large misty shape rose into the space between Bakugou and Izuku's team, blocking the fiery explosion. It was Takoyami's dark shadow, providing a solid defense for their team. As Blossom watched the scene unfold, she started to mull on the subject of Izuku. With his plan that gained him near victory of the race to the seemingly calculated and perfect roster he chose for the cavalry team. Izuku was smarter than she had thought, and his shrewd tactics were starting to jeopardize her success. She couldn't have that, especially if she wanted to make it to the top and prove to everyone that her skills were top tier. It was settled. As of right now, Izuku was her biggest threat. As the attack faded, Bakugou came falling back towards the ground. But before he could hit it, his teammate Zero used his quirk to wrap the former in tape and pull him back to the safety of his teammate's arms. Meanwhile, some teams who watched started to murmur in shock and confusion. Soon, Midnight's voice echoed over the stadium. For those who are wondering, yes, Bakugou's maneuver is allowed in the game. As long as your leader doesn't touch the ground, you are safe to do whatever move you'd like, she announced. At this, the girls lit up with excitement. "Aw hell yeah," Buttercup whooped. Blossom smiled slyly with a hand on her chin. "Well, with that in mind, I think I'll revise my plan. But first, we need at least some points." After she said this, a crackling noise suddenly filled Blossom's ears, causing her to tense. Immediately, she knew from the sound what was about to happen. "Quick, jump up," she ordered. "Huh?" Bubbles and Buttercup asked in unison. "Jump," Blossom hollered. Their faces growing startled, her sisters complied as they took off into the air. And right as their feet left the ground, it was instantly frozen over, as ice spread across the majority of the arena. Immediately, Blossom knew the cause of the sudden flash freeze. Todoroki. Sure enough, Todoroki's team skates on by frozen and defenseless teams, going for Izuku's team, who was able to escape the onslaught of ice. To Blossom's shock, she noticed that there were not only one but multiple headbands looped around Todoroki's neck, implying that he has a plethora of points. Looks like he has some points to spare. As Bubbles and Buttercup landed, Blossom looked towards Todoroki's team, her eyes swiftly narrowing. Change of plans, girls. We gotta go for Todoroki and his team, and swipe one of his headbands. Leave Midoriya's team alone for now. Buttercup looked almost appalled by this. But they got our points. You can't be letting them go unscathed. What happened to? Trust me, Letting them go is the last thing we're doing. Blossom interrupted. We just need at least a couple of points to fall back on in case we can't get to it on time. And with the third place points, that will bump us up some, Bubbles finished, her eyes flashing with understanding. Exactly. With a new plan in gear, the girls were off. Using powerful kicks and maneuvers, the girls gilded as one across the ice, their flying trails propelling them like rockets. But just as they closed in, Blossom saw something that made her heart stutter. An ice wall twice their size formed directly in front of them, easily doubling in size with every passing moment. Instantly, Blossom thought to scream to her sisters, who were speeding along like bullets. But she knew better. At the speed they were going, her sisters wouldn't stop in time. They were reckless cannonballs dead set on a target that could easily smash any hopes of them getting to Todoroki. No. Like hell it would. With that thought in mind, Blossom thrusted back her elbow. From her fingers, fire ignited and trailed down her palms. Finally, with a war cry, Blossom shot her hand at the large wall. In seconds, the wall exploded on contact, sending icy gusts and crystals flying everywhere. Amid the foggy mist, Blossom looked up from her angry glare, and a familiar scarred face stared back, wide-eyed with surprise. He walked himself right into her trap. Instantly catching on to the spontaneous plan, her sisters changed their trajectory, switching the position of their feet so that they ran right past Todoroki and his team. And as they did, Blossom looped a finger under some of Todoroki's headbands and lifted them right to her. After that, time picked up from Blossom's slow-motion worldview, as the girls skidded to a stop right before they hit the barriers of the arena. It was then that Blossom picked up on the rabid cheers of the crowd and the shocked looks on everyone's faces as they stared at the girls. Yet she was only fixated on Todoroki's face, his furious red-hot face. He seemed to forget about Izuku's team entirely at that moment, as he ordered his team to charge forward. But by then, Blossom gathered her senses and urged her sisters to escape, narrowly avoiding his grasp as they pivoted out of reach. Her sisters backed up towards the middle of the arena among the chaos of teams scrambling for headbands. All the while, Todoroki stalked towards them ominously. Occasionally, a team would flash by between the two teams, blocking Blossom's sight of Todoroki. Yet every time, he was still there and his teammates still marched on. And in her mind, Blossom's gears were turning. Up until the festival, she never assumed Todoroki would be an enemy of hers. They stayed out of each other's way for the most part, but both of them were forces to be reckoned with. It was a fact that sooner or later, these forces would come to clash. He had clashed with her during the race, and now he's coming at her full force. Blossom gritted her teeth, cursing herself. All this time she was worrying over the small things, when the bigger issues went unchecked. The very thing she didn't want to do. Damn it. What's the plan, Bloss? Buttercup called to her. Suddenly, as quickly as she was sucked out of it, Blossom came to her senses. Now was no time for her analysis. No matter what you do not let Todoroki get his headbands. Be prepared to give it your all in defending our points, understand? Yes, ma'am, her sisters declared. But before the declaration could even reach Blossom's ears, they finally took action. With breakneck speeds, Todoroki's team closed the distance between them. Just as Todoroki thrusted a hand out, Blossom was thrown to the side by her sisters so that he couldn't reach her. Before she could register the movement, her sisters sprinted away, their heavy steps in sync. Blossom instantly looked over her shoulder to see Todoroki in hot pursuit, following them in a heated chase. But as she did, another team off to the side seemed to catch her eye. Izuku's team, with her 10 million points. Currently, his team was doing everything in their power to keep their points, defending and evading their opponents. Yet Izuku himself was fixated on the girls and Todoroki, watching with bated breath and wide eyes. It was almost like he was in the crowd rather than an actual participant. Despite herself, Blossom fixated on his face, watching him sit among his teammates gawking, and after all this time, they managed to defend the 10 million headband. They, as in Izuku's teammates. Izuku himself didn't seem to be doing much other than yelling occasional orders. Some self-proclaimed leader he is, always trying to steal the spotlight while not actually doing anything. Blossom tore her eyes away, suddenly disoriented. For a good second, it seemed like Blossom was feeling anger towards the green-haired boy. "What are you doing, Blossom?" "All right, y'all, 2 minutes left. Get to scrambling and secure those points," Midnight declared with a flourish. At the announcement, Blossom felt paralyzing fear as she looked at the clock, which indeed showed 2 minutes. So far, the 3 headbands looped around her neck equaled 250 points. Considering everyone else's scores, that would place her and her sisters at 4th place. All below everyone else. Below everyone. "Hey, Bloss, Todoroki's off our backs now." As she heard Buttercup's words, Blossom's head snapped down. "What? He's not chasing us. He went after Midoriya instead," Bubbles clarified. Sure enough, as Blossom whipped her head around, she saw Todoroki's team quickly changing course to head for Izuku's team. It seemed like the girls completely slipped his mind. The 2-minute warning probably made him take another course of action to scale the leaderboard, and other teams seemed to think the same as their attention strayed towards Izuku's team. What better team to go after than the 10 million point team? Izuku's team was the spotlight now. Nobody focused on the girls now. "I guess that's better for us, huh?" Buttercup sighed with a grin. "While those wimps take the heat off of us, we got our top 5 spots secured." "No." Her sisters immediately tensed at Blossom's scream, which came out of nowhere. "Huh? What happened?" Bubbles asked, worried. But Blossom was stuck in her own world completely now, as a ghost of rage twisted her features into a scowl. "No, no, no, I'm not giving up. We're taking the headband from Izuku." Bubbles glanced at the other teams frantically. But the other teams? "I don't care about the other teams. We're getting that headband one way or another," she growled. "Now on my mark, fly towards them and don't stop. Got it?" "Bloss, I don't think this is a good." "I don't care." Bubbles quickly shut up at her sister's shouts, while Buttercup seemed to shiver a little bit with pride and determination, maybe even a little fear. "You heard her, Bubs. Get ready to blast off." With that, Buttercup and reluctantly Bubbles got into position, readying themselves for Blossom's signal. Meanwhile, Blossom watched Todoroki and Izuku, her eyes narrowing. The 2 teams were in a heated confrontation, and the 10 million points seemed to be on the line. Every jerking maneuver and every dodge loosened the headband on Izuku more and more. Soon, there would be an opening when Blossom would make the call, yet she ached to grab it more than ever. Until it happened. Todoroki has his hand on the headband, pulling it towards him. But simultaneously, Izuku holds on tight, trying not to let go. It's a tug of war, and the 10 million points stretch in between despite the chaos of everything happening around her as the match draws to a close. Blossom zeroes in on the headband. The prize was hers. "Now," she yelled. She wasn't going to be a pushover anymore. She wasn't some kid they could ignore. No, she was a hero. The greatest hero nobody could dream of beating. And as the girls blasted off as a tricolored rocket, heading straight towards the 2 teams, Blossom finally let the cheers of the crowd in, soaking in their energy. This crowd wanted a show. She'll give them one. Ha! Suddenly, Blossom sprang up from her sister's grasp in a long jumping leap. She twirled through the air, using the momentum gained from their flight to launch her like a bomb. She fit in the gap between Izuku and Todoroki seamlessly. She could feel the headband they raised high into the air graze her front before snatching it. Once she flew past, she saw their heads turning to lock their gazes on hers. And for that moment, Blossom could see it in their eyes. That spark that could set the world on fire if they wanted it to. The passion and determination were strong and easily strengthened her own. She wanted to see that. More than ever. Maybe that's why she grabbed the headbands around her neck, yanking them off and sending them into the air like ribbons. And once again, time sped up. She hurtled dangerously fast towards the barrier and would have flown right over it. But suddenly, strong hands caught her and brought her back down to earth. And before Blossom could even gather her bearings, the buzzer blared throughout the stadium. Just like the end of the race, everything was deafeningly quiet until Present Mike called it. "The Wonder Girls sweep the win," he screams. At this, the cheers come back in full swing. Just then, the leaderboard flashes into view, confirming the victory. #1, Momoko, Miyako, and Kaoru. Absolutely amazing, folks. It's safe to say we're witnessing history here with the hottest cavalry battle we've had yet. Blossom could only stare at the leaderboard, dazed. That is, until she was suddenly launched into the air by her ecstatic sisters throwing her up and down. What the what? That was insane, Buttercup whooped, completely over the moon. Yay Blossom, Bubbles hollered. As they set Blossom onto her feet, a dizzy grin was now on her face as her sisters wrapped her into a suffocating hug. Once again, she watched the people around her, feeling like she was in a dream. Coming right after, a few points shorter, was Team Todoroki in second place, as Todoroki was aided by the headbands Blossom tossed towards him. But compared to his other teammates, he looked significantly less happy, as his fist nearly strangled the headband in his grip. If he had any intention of acknowledging Blossom's presence, he clearly tried not to indulge it by not even glancing her way. Bakugou was a different story entirely, as his team got pushed all the way to third place. He looked absolutely livid. Some of his friends even had to restrain him so that he wouldn't go crazy. He seemed to be the only person looking in the girl's direction, pure hatred and fire in his eyes. And then there was Izuku, who was crying as his teammates stood around him. At first, it looked like he was devastated, like he had lost. But it soon appeared as tears of joy, once Blossom noticed what Takoyami was holding. His dark shadow had caught the headband she threw at them, along with some other points they snatched along the way, which boosted Team Izuku all the way to fourth place, taking up the last slot. Which meant, as Blossom realized with shock, that mostly, if not only Class 1 students were going to move on. From now on, her opponents would be her classmates, and maybe even her sisters. The thought of fighting them used to stir so much anxiety in Blossom's gut. But as she stood there, trapped in between her sister's hug, Blossom felt that same feeling. That creeping feeling that influenced her actions in the cavalry battle seemed to become so much clearer for her. It was a belief of hers, a fact that she finally seemed to find again beneath the layers of her insistent anxiety. Blossom was miles above these people. She wished she realized it sooner, like in the battle trial, or even way back when the entrance exam was taking place. But Blossom was now realizing how much power she held. She was a Powerpuff Girl, way before she would ever be anything else. A US student, a Class 1 student, a friend, or a training hero. Before any of that, first and foremost, she was a Powerpuff Girl. A Powerpuff Girl who could easily beat these kids without breaking a sweat. And yet she and her sisters stood as the most criticized, the most judged, and the most watched US students here right now. Maybe in history. All of Blossom's otherworldly accomplishments and self-confidence were buried under those jabbing comments from students and critics, as well as the patronizing sympathy. Not anymore. She didn't care if she had to take down a whole army. She'll do anything to show these people who she really is. And Izuku and Todoroki will be the ones to help them realize that. Something Blossom was at ease about was the break that came after the battle. Despite her determination, Blossom had to admit she was exhausted. From the race to the battle, it was a little too much. So when they announced everyone would disperse for lunch, Blossom was relieved beyond measure. That is, for 2 seconds. Bubbles and Buttercup were already having the time of their lives, as their one of friends invited them for a tour of the food vendors at the festival. But as they whined to Blossom to go with them, Blossom politely declined and said that she'll catch up with them later. And so, Blossom was alone. That's exactly how she wanted to be. She wanted to feel normal for once, taking a break from the action and the chaos. Even though her little epiphany during the battle did clear a lot of things from her conscience, Blossom still felt the need to reflect on everything so far. Which was a nice activity to do, especially on a peaceful walk around the outside of the arena. As she walked, Blossom's stomach grumbled, impatient that she wasn't at a food truck with her friends stuffing her face. Blossom sighed the grumbles away, breathing in the fresh summer air and taking in the sounds of the breeze. But with the breeze came a voice. A voice that chilled Blossom to the core, just like his merciless ice. Momoko. She swiftly turned around to see a face she had been dreading to see. Todoroki was approaching, all alone. And even though he didn't look angry, the tense atmosphere he brought with him seemed to choke Blossom up. Before she could say a word, Todoroki said, "I need to talk to you." It wasn't a question. Those words held a finality that rooted her to the spot. Meanwhile, Todoroki moved around her, heading towards one of the openings that served as a stadium entrance. Once he did, he glanced over his shoulder, seeing if she was going to follow. Blossom gulped slowly, wondering what would happen if she just walked away and never looked back. Not even considering how Todoroki would feel, Blossom knew she couldn't, solely because she wouldn't. Her curiosity was too damn persistent. So, with her head held high, Blossom walked towards the opening, leaning on the wall across from Todoroki. As she leaned back, she looked at Todoroki, crossing her arms. She waited for him to speak or do something. But it was like he was a blank slate, just staring at her with empty eyes. Todoroki seemed to be completely unreadable. All the while, Blossom braced for anything. A scream, a glare, venomous insults, anything. Finally, after a long moment, he whispered, "How?" Blossom's churning thoughts stuttered to a stop. "Huh." Todoroki was quiet once more, and before Blossom could fear another tense moment of silence, he spoke again. "During the race and the cavalry battle, you always seemed so quick to win," he muttered. "You move like a bullet, faster than anything a human could possibly achieve. I've never seen anything like it." Blossom's breath caught in her throat, and suddenly, she felt the need to hide from his piercing stare. They weren't lying when they would talk about you and your sisters. You guys are the youngest people to enter UA, and yet, you managed to outsmart and outcompete every person here. Todoroki continued, calm as ever. "And the power you hold, it begs the question of how much power you guys have in the first place. So, I have questions." Blossom's jaw ticked, and she willed her heart to stop beating so fast. But it was hard to. With every sentence Todoroki said, it was like he was inching closer to a truth she could never reveal. One that could ruin everything if he knew it. That was where her mind was going. Until Todoroki asked this. "Are you Superman's secret love child or something?" Blossom blinked. It was like her tension magically disappeared with the question, leaving her in a state of confusion. The question Todoroki asked seemed completely ridiculous, and Blossom couldn't help but let a bewildered chuckle escape. And yet, Todoroki stood there with his eyes narrowed, waiting. He wasn't even messing with her. He genuinely wanted to know. "No," Blossom answered. "No?" Todoroki asked, tilting his head slightly. Suddenly abashed, Blossom jumped. No, I didn't mean to sound unsure. It just seems like a weird question. I don't think I've heard that before. Superman? Does he even exist in this?" Quickly, Blossom snapped her mouth shut as she saw Todoroki's eyebrows raised. Finally, she looked off to the side, scratching her head. "No, I'm not," she finally sighed. Todoroki bowed his head slightly, once again back to his blank slate face. "I admit, it's a stupid question to ask. Superman is merely fiction." Blossom lowered her hand, suddenly grateful for not letting her last sentence slip. But then, she frowned. "Then why did you ask?" she questioned. Todoroki looked up at her, pausing for a second. "You're like him. Flight, laser eyes, ice breath. Your powers and his are nearly identical. Your quirk is like a comic book superhero come to life." Blossom fidgeted with her hands, looking uneasy. "Yeah, well, it's not like I understand it much either," she said, speaking truthfully. Todoroki tore his eyes away and looked off to the side. "I've always thought about it, ever since you arrived. Yet, my sights weren't focused on you. I never intended to clash with you during this festival. I had assumed Midoriya would be my first threat." Blossom's eyes widened, confused by his confession. "Izuku?" Todoroki nods. "Yes, after all, he is the closest to All Might." Blossom frowned, bewildered. All Might? But the more she thought about it, the more Blossom realized there was truth to Todoroki's admission. During her time at UA, she had seen Izuku and All Might interact, and every time there was something she thought were coincidences. Shared glances, private conversations. There was even that one moment back at the Usti incident, where Izuku was overwhelmingly concerned about All Might. The whole time, Blossom had chalked it up as nothing but coincidences. But now, she did admit there was something between the green-haired boy and the #1 hero. Maybe he's All Might's secret love child, she thought dryly. But then, a far more important question came to her mind. "Why does it matter that he's close to All Might?" Blossom asked. Todoroki suddenly looked back at her, surprised that she would ask such a question. But the moment was brief as he composed himself. Beating him would be the closest I would get to beating All Might. His confession threw Blossom for a loop. What? Beating All Might? Why would you want to do that? She asked, dropping her guard entirely. Todoroki seemed hesitant as he closed his eyes. Because it's my destiny. The world stopped. All of the loud noises of the festival seemed to drift away, leaving only Todoroki's voice and hers. It was like with only his words, Todoroki froze the very atmosphere, including Blossom, as her blood ran cold. Your destiny? Todoroki nodded once more. It has been my destiny since birth, ever since I became the son of the number 2 pro hero. Blossom's eyebrows furrowed. Immediately, her countless research on pro heroes came to mind, as she recalled the number 2 pro hero, which she did in seconds. You're the son of Endeavor? Todoroki paused, then nodded. Blossom stumbled back, flattening against the wall as she recalled the hero. That's right, Inji Todoroki, she whispered. He's the flame hero, who has a quirk who can control fire. Todoroki scoffed softly. Yeah, and he's a complete disappointment of a father. Blossom gasped, taken aback by his words. Meanwhile, he looked unbothered. Your knowledge gained from online articles only tell you so much. If you knew it all, you would know that Endeavor isn't just a #2 hero. He's a madman, hellbent on taking the #1 title from All Might. Blossom's eyes softened. He was right. She didn't know all of that. But even so, the fact that Endeavor had this fiery rivalry with All Might wasn't something she felt the need to look into. Until now. Todoroki's eyes glazed over slightly, as if tuning everything out. My old man is obsessed with All Might. Everything in his career he did to rise above All Might. And if he couldn't do it himself, he would ensure someone of his kin did. He wanted to make sure that his child would be the perfect mold for the number 1 hero. With the strongest quirk, the keenest intellect, and the ability to meet high expectations. That's why he entered a quirk marriage to ensure it completely. Quirk marriage? Blossom asked. A union between 2 powerful quirks. That was how he came to be with my mother, and how I came into this world. My quirk was the perfect balance. Fire and ice, hot and cold. Blossom couldn't believe what she was hearing. Taking in his lineage and the potentials of his quirk, Todoroki was an unimaginably strong person. A fact that ran way deeper than she could ever comprehend. Todoroki continued on, unaware of Blossom's horror-stricken face. From my conception, I've been trained to take over the #1 hero spot. It was the only reason why I was created, of course. My old man isolated me, you see. My family were distractions, he said. And my mother, I almost never saw her. The only memories I have of her now were her crying, and this scar. Todoroki softly touched the left side of his face, where his pinkish healing scar was. How does a scar remind you of her? Todoroki closed his eyes. She gave it to me. She had called my left side, my fire, unbearable before burning me with boiling water. Blossom quickly put a hand to her mouth, biting back a gasp. She couldn't help but feel pure terror in that moment for Todoroki. All for an event that seemed to have happened years ago. Despite that, if Todoroki noticed any horror on her face, he didn't acknowledge it. The moment I entered this festival today, my old man wanted me to do it. Use the fire he's given me to win this tournament. But I refuse. For the things he's done to my family, to my mother, he doesn't deserve the pride he'd get from me using my fireside. After he said that, Todoroki's gaze cleared and he blinked. He finally focused on Blossom, who tried her best to hide any sign of concern or worry she felt in that moment. And it was like Todoroki suddenly realized what he was here for, as his gaze took on a steely determination. But you nearly drew it out of me. This whole time, you've been beating me, driving me to the edge. And now, the only reason I pass on to the final round is because of your handout. As he says the last word, his voice takes on a suddenly venomous anger, startling Blossom. Todoroki takes a deep breath, his shoulders dropping slightly. And yet, I feel compelled to fight you, Momoko. There is no doubt we'll cross paths again in the final round. And when that time comes, I have no doubts or reservations. I won't lose to you again. and I won't let you tempt me to use my fire again." Blossom let his declaration hit her at once, as her fist curled by her side. And as she did, a realization hit her just as hard. She wasn't thrown off by Todoroki's determination. In fact, it was the opposite. She had caught a glimpse of it when she stole the headband. That look of pure fire and battle-ready passion. That very thing was what made fighting so amazing to her. Every opponent she faced, no matter how strong, had that passion that made Blossom want to push herself to her limit. And she saw it now, clear as day on Todoroki's face, and even as he turned to walk away without warning, which is what drove her to make a brash choice. "Wait." Todoroki paused at her call, keeping his back turned but glancing over his shoulder. As he did, Blossom felt her leader confidence rushing back as she stood tall and narrowed her eyes. "My motivation to win may not be as heavy as yours, but if we do fight again, I won't let you win easily. No matter what happens at that moment, I will beat you, Todoroki." Todoroki let her declaration sink in as well. Finally, he walked away. "I'll look forward to it." As he left the area, Blossom slowly exhaled. She knew now that Todoroki was to be her rival, the only thing stopping her from getting to the top. And like he just told her, she was the same to him as well. Even though the conversation still ran wild in her mind, Blossom set off in the opposite direction. She had her mind made up. There was one more person she needed to speak to. Momoko. Blossom was quiet, staring at the boy in front of her. After long minutes of searching, she had finally found him alone in the locker rooms. Izukumidoriya, the intriguing classmate that Todoroki had first intended to fight. And this time, Blossom would be the one grilling him. She tilted her head, watching Izuku as he sat on the bench. Thankfully, no one was with him, but she knew people would soon be coming in after lunch. She had to be quick with this. "Hi, Izuku? Do you mind if we talk?" Izuku blinked, surprised by the proposition, leading him to mildly panic. "Oh, yes. No, I don't mind. Yeah, we can talk." Blossom nodded as she sat on the bench right across from him. "I don't mean to interrupt your alone time. I just have a lot on my mind," she sighed. Izuku seemed to relax, the tenseness leaving his body slowly, and to her slight surprise, his eyes grew worried. "Yeah, I know the feeling," he finally answered. "This sports festival has my mind racing." Blossom smiled a little. "Same here. It's a lot, huh? Knowing all of Japan is watching you." "Definitely. It's nothing like I'm used to. It's kind of scary, but it's also motivating too," Izuku gushed before looking a little nervous. "At least, that's how I see it." Blossom silently agreed, recalling the intense fighting spirit she felt in both the race and the cavalry battle. And as she reflected on those moments, she could remember Izuku's face, that spark of determination to win. "Is that why you tried to beat me those times?" Izuku's eyebrows raised, surprised. "What?" Blossom closed her eyes. "Well, there's no turning back now. I've seen you in the race, and the cavalry battle too. Every time I did, you tried to pull ahead, and you almost did. There's no doubt that if I didn't manage to find that boost of energy to steal the win, you would easily win both events. You're a very calculated person, you know." Izuku blinked, his anxiety more apparent. "You think so?" "I know so. Somehow, you have this ability to measure your opponent, finding the best ways to win that's suited to your abilities. Not just in this festival, but in the battle trial and even the entrance exam." Blossom opened her eyes as they strayed towards Izuku's hands. With a start, she noticed that they were bandaged, his fingers set in a temporary cast. She never noticed it, yet it was all the more proof she needed for her next point. "Yet, in the heat of the moment, you became a different person entirely." Blossom continued, narrowing her eyes. "You're way more reckless. It's like you don't think about your actions before you do them, even if it hurts you. Especially with your quirk. Despite the fact that it hurts you, you always use it to win." Izuku lowered his head, as if ashamed. "I do that, huh?" Blossom sighed. "I don't really mean it in a judgmental way. I just..." Suddenly, overtaken by courage, she stood up. "I want to see that more." Taken aback by her sudden movements, Izuku's eyes widened. "Momoko. You're a mystery, Midoriya. And more than ever, I want to know just exactly what power you hide. Blossom declared before pointing at Izuku. I don't want you to hurt yourself, but I want to see your fighting spirit. That's why I want to battle you in the final round. Izuku stared at her, an unreadable expression on his face. As he did, Blossom felt her moment of willpower lessen a little as she lowered her hand. Sorry, I kinda got caught up in the moment, Blossom mumbled. After she said that, Izuku shook his head and stood up as well. No, you're right. I understand. It's why I wanted to fight you too. Blossom's eyes widened, this time being the one in shock. You do? Izuku nodded before slightly smiling. It seems we both have mysteries of our own, and I hope we can settle them in combat. Plus, I still have to get back at you for stealing my first place spot. Blossom let his words sink in. Finally, she nodded and stuck a hand out with a smile. Then let's promise to give it our all. Izuku looked at the hand before finally offering his good hand and shaking hers. Right, he said with an equal grin. With the promise sealed, a chime played over the intercom. This is an announcement to all festival attendees, President Mike's voice spoke through the speakers. Please make your way to the stadium. The events are about to resume. As the intercom turned off, Izuku looked up. That's our cue. Blossom nodded as she looked around. As she looked towards the locker room entrance, however, she caught something that flashed past for a second. A shock of blonde hair. Startled, Blossom rushed to the door, to Izuku's surprise. As she reached the door, she looked out into the dark hallway. No one was there. Momoko, what is it? Izuku asked, coming up behind her. Blossom swallowed slowly, watching the hallway with a frown. After a short moment, she shook her head. It's nothing. Come on, let's go to the stadium. What is Shoto doing? The furious yell echoed throughout the empty hallways, not doing much to overcome the sounds of the cheers in the heart of the stadium. As the words faded, the speaker gritted his teeth, the flames lining his shoulder growing in intensity. I told him to focus, he muttered to himself. He was supposed to give it his all, and yet he lost. Every time. To a little girl. Overcome with rage, he punched a wall. The very structure trembled from its power, as a rumbling noise was felt even along the walls farther away from the punch's location. And among that rumbling noise, a familiar happy voice shouted, Ah, punching walls again, old friend? Slowly, he turned, his eyes fiery, and before him, approaching down the hall with that signature grin, was the #1 hero himself. Instantly, the man straightened, pushing off the wall just as hard as his punch. Instantly, his eyes narrowed in the presence of his fated rival, the one he hated oh so much. All Might, he growled. All Might finally got close before stopping with open arms. Endeavor, it's been so long. Endeavor was still, staring at All Might with undisguised contempt. He lifted his head, almost turning his nose up from him. Well, that's no way to treat an old buddy, All Might announced, a little daunted by Endeavor's behavior. We haven't spoken in, what, like 10 years? I wanted to give you a shout out. Perhaps we can convene for some tea. Before All Might could finish, Endeavor was already moving, suddenly walking past him and walking away. This took All Might for a loop. You can take that tea offer somewhere else, All Might. Good day. With his back turned, Endeavor didn't seem to notice All Might's smile disappear entirely, as the latter furrowed his brows deep in thought. Suddenly, All Might goes up to Endeavor, grabbing his arm to hold him up. Listen, Endeavor. In the grand scheme of things, Shoto really is remarkable. Even without using his fire. It doesn't matter if he hasn't gotten first place yet. He still is in the making for a great hero. After he said that, All Might grinned again. So, that proves all the more how great a teacher you can be. And from a friend to a friend, I'd like some advice on how to cultivate this promising generation of heroes. Endeavor was quiet, looking at All Might, then at his hand on his arm. Finally, he pushes it away. Your attitude is as sickeningly annoying as ever. As for Shoto, there is no doubt he is skilled. I created him to be that way. And I don't care how many clones of you come out in the tournament to beat him, because he will rise above everyone. Especially you. Saying everything he intended to say, Endeavor walked away, and this time, All Might didn't stop him. Once All Might was alone in the hallway, he sighed, shaking his head. Some things never change. Alright, y'all, who's ready for the sports festival finals? With Present Mike's announcement, the crowd thundered with cheers. That's what I'm talking about. And these students you see now are just as pumped as I am, especially after our little break for some recreational side games. Sure enough, the stadium below was filled with the remaining students in the tournament, doing various mini-games, and off to the side, the girls were participating in their own little thing. Be aggressive. Be aggressive. Going through a number of inspirational chants, the girls of Class 1A had temporarily dressed into cheerleader uniforms, cheering on the other students in their games. As they did, they arranged themselves into human pyramids, lifting up some cheerleaders to lift their palms up and cheer. And one of those cheerleaders was none other than Bubbles. "Woo, go you, she whooped. After she said that, she crouched before springing into the air in a somersault, soaring high above everyone's heads before landing into the arms of her friends. "Wow, that was a sweet flip, Miyako," Uraraka gushed. Bubbles laughed, her cheeks rosy. "Thanks." As the girls set her down, Bubbles jumped with joy and waved at her sisters. While Blossom clapped happily with her pom-poms, Buttercup gave an awkward smile, shifting uncomfortably in her cheerleader outfit. "Let's go, girls. Let's pump this stadium up," Bubbles shouted loudly. Blossom giggled. "Seems like you're feeling the US spirit." "I sure am," Bubbles exclaimed before rushing over to Buttercup and grabbing her hand. "Come on, Buttercup, let's do some cartwheels." Buttercup grimaced. "Yeah, I'll pass." Blossom smirked as she looked at her sister. "Is it because you're wearing a skirt?" Buttercup gritted her teeth as she pulled her skirt down more. "What is the big whoop about skirts? They're uncomfortable and weird, and it doesn't help that those perverts tricked us into wearing them." "Oh, lighten up," Bubbles chirped. "You know what?" Suddenly, Bubbles took off, running across a clear path before breaking out into a series of rapid cartwheels and flips, landing perfectly with a grin. As the girls went wild, Bubbles looked at Buttercup slyly. "Try and beat that," she declared. Buttercup slowly grinned. Suddenly, she threw her pom-poms towards Blossom before cracking her knuckles. It seemed like her unappreciation for skirts was set aside by her competitive nature. "Oh, please, I can beat that in my sleep," she declared. With that, she took off way faster than Bubbles, quickly breaking out into cartwheels and flips. At the end, however, she did a tucked front flip, soaring over Bubbles' head and landing in front of her. "Shabuya," she shouted, doing a fist pump. "That's how you do it." As she did, the girls broke out into a chant. "Kaoru. Cool girl Kaoru, cool girl Kaoru, hey." Buttercup watched them before hiding her face, blushing with embarrassment. "Aw geez, you don't gotta do all that." But her embarrassment stopped when she noticed a small group of boys giggling madly. "Yo, what the hell you looking at?" she yelled before sprinting after them as they scattered with fear. But before she could get her hands on the boys to beat them up, a series of pleasant chimes played on the loudspeakers. As everyone paused, Present Mike spoke again. "And now, the time for fun festivities is finally over," he announced. "All students, please gather around midnight to hear how the final round will proceed." Immediately, the students stopped what they were doing and got themselves in order, gathering in the middle of the arena. As they did, that familiar feeling of dreadful anticipation wormed its way into everyone's mind. Even Bubbles, whose joy about cheerleading seemed to falter as she joined her sisters. "And so it begins," Blossom whispered. "Well, this is gonna be fun. I've been waiting for this moment," Buttercup declared, grinning as she crossed her arms. "Speaking of moment, how is the final round going to go? Do you know what we're doing?" Bubbles asked. After she spoke, another classmate surprisingly answered the question. "Beats me," Kirishima speaks up. "It changes every year." Next to him, Buttercup looked surprised. "It changes? Man, that's confusing." "Not really." Zero enters the conversation. "All of the time, it usually involves a one-on-one match." Sure enough, Midnight finally speaks up to confirm Zero's words. "Okay, everyone. Now I know you guys have been waiting for what the final round holds, and I'm pleased to announce that this year will be a fighting tournament." At her words, students looked happy and cheered, especially Buttercup. "Fighting tournament?" she shouted, her eyes filled with energetic glee. "Aw yeah." Midnight winked. That's right, in just a few moments, we will be starting a tourney with the top 4 teams. First off, we will do 8 one-on-one battles for our first round. Whoever wins their match will move up to the second round, where the cycle repeats and our third round begins. Finally, the winners of the third round battles will enter the final round, and whoever comes out victorious will become our sports festival champion. As everyone cheered once more, Blossom slowly exhaled, the instructions sinking in. So for her to win the finals, she had to beat 3 opponents, plus the finalist. In total, she needed to win 4 entire battles to win the festival. The feat seemed simple enough, but with everything that's been going on, Blossom knows that whatever she writes off as simple proves to be the opposite. Her rivalry with Todoroki and Izuku is proof of that. Now, please look at the screen above to see who you guys are paired up with for the brackets. With Midnight's cue, the board switched to a drawing of the tournament bracket. The 8 battles were lined along the bottom, with 16 brackets with names grouped up in pairs. The names were as follows: Midoriya vs. Shinso, Todoroki vs. Shiro, Miyako Yu vs. Momoko Yu, Ida vs. Hatsum, Takoyami vs. Yayurazu, Kaminari vs. Kaoru Yu, Tetsutetsu vs. Kirishima, Uraraka vs. Bakugou. As you can see, this is the final list for our tournament contenders. Whoever's names aren't up here but has passed the cavalry battle has previously asked to officially resign from the tournament and give up the spots. Therefore, other students were given the chance to take their place. Blossom frowned as she inspected the list. Some people resigned, I wonder who. Meanwhile, Bubbles seemed to find the missing people immediately, causing her to gasp dramatically. Wait, where's Mashiro? Mashi who? Buttercup asked, her face blank with confusion. You know, Ojiro, Bubbles urged, turning to her sisters. But as she did, Buttercup and even Blossom stared at her even more confused. Doesn't ring a bell, Blossom replied. Bubbles frowned. You guys still don't know our classmates. Wow. Well, sorry we didn't remember everyone's names while you were giving out friendship bracelets, Buttercup sighed, exasperated. Now, who's mashed potatoes? Mashiro is the tail guy, Bubbles finally snapped. Blossom's eyes lit up in recognition. Immediately, she searched for who Bubbles was talking about, and there he was, in the crowd, his arms crossed and a conflicted expression on his face. As she stared, Bubbles and Buttercup joined her gawking. Oh, that guy? He's backing out? Buttercup asked. But why? His team did well in the cavalry battle. Why did he suddenly feel the need to back out? Bubbles exclaimed, with sad eyes. Buttercup frowned before scoffing. Isn't it obvious? Dude couldn't handle the pressure and tapped out. What a wimp. Blossom raised an eyebrow. Although she didn't agree at all with Buttercup calling him a wimp, she did wonder what possessed him to get so scared to battle. Abandoning such an important event takes away the attention and applause you deserve. Such a waste of potential. She couldn't stop the snide thought from entering her head. So after some additional accommodation, we're on our way to some actual battling. Please keep your opponents in mind, and remember when your battle takes place, Midnight exclaimed. As Blossom looked to the board again, making sure to follow Midnight's instructions, she finally noticed something about her battle, and that realization made her heart completely shut down. Miyako Yu versus Momoko Yu. She hadn't caught it before, since she was still getting used to her fake name. But as she saw her name up there, she realized that she had not been put against a Class 1A or even a 1B student. It was her own sister. Wow, Blossom, looks like I'm fighting you, Bubbles cried, both shocked and gleeful. Blossom side-eyed her as a number of thoughts entered her mind. But this one happened to be the loudest. Why her? It wasn't like she didn't want to hurt her sister. She knew Bubbles could tank anything that she threw at her. But that was precisely why she hated the aspect of battling her. She didn't want to fight her. She wanted to fight someone fresh, an unpredictable opponent, with powers she hasn't seen before. Hell, she'd even settle for fighting the support department girl rather than freaking Bubbles. She was sick of it, always being paired with her sisters. It was all a game to Bubbles, and she didn't seem to realize that Blossom didn't want to play games anymore. But before she could even voice her concerns, it was too late. And with that, Izukumidoriya and Hitoshi Shinso will kick the first battle off. Everyone else, please report to their assigned seats in the crowd. As for the crowd, get ready because the show is about to begin. The stadium erupted with pure excitement from both the crowd and the students. But Blossom, as she soon came to realize, felt her mood begin to dampen. Just a little. But something out of the corner of her eye pulls her mind off the battle. Izuku was standing there, murmuring to himself as usual. That is, until a purple-haired guy walked up to him, saying something that couldn't be heard above the roar of the crowd. But before Blossom could blink, Ojiro had intercepted the two, his face unusually stormy. Finally, Ojiro seemed to guide Izuku away, whispering to him. All the while, the purple-haired boy stood there, looking like he was smirking. The whole interaction seemed so random. What's that about? Blossom whispered to herself. Eh? What's that, Blossom? Bubbles asked. Blossom snapped out of her contemplation, grounded back in her own situation. Almost annoyed, she glanced at Bubbles. Nothing, she replied dismissively. Suddenly, she turned her back and started to leave with the rest of the group heading to exit the stadium floor. Meanwhile, her sisters watched her leave, somewhat unsettled. Hey, do you think Blossom's okay? Bubbles asked Buttercup. Buttercup looked at her, and for the first time, she looked serious as her eyebrows furrowed in concentration. Who knows? She's been this way since she won the race. It's like she's stuck in her head about something. Bubbles' expression of concern intensified. Do you think she's bored of this already? I mean, she won both events. Maybe she's sick of the tournament? Bubbles suggested. Buttercup shook her head, her face already shifting to her light-hearted attitude. Nah. If she did, she would have backed out. If anything, it looks like she's dying to fight someone. I know I am. Bubbles looked hesitant, before finally sighing as the two began to walk with the group. I guess I'm just a little paranoid. She didn't really look like she wanted to fight me. Buttercup frowned, somehow offended that she said that. Yeah, you're right. You do sound paranoid. You gotta chill, Bubs. Of course she wants to fight you. In fact, I bet she can't wait to fight you right now. Bubbles took in her sister's encouraging words before huffing in determination and curling her fists. Right, and I'll make sure to give her a fight she won't regret. Blossom couldn't stop herself from fidgeting, something that sounded completely unlike her. Faintly, she recalled her days back in her home dimension, a time that seemed to appear as faraway memories. She always remembered the intense build-up before a fight. Bubbles and Buttercup were always jumping off the walls, but Blossom never participated in that. She always kept herself calm, creating a game plan in her mind to defeat the bad guy. But now, this was different. It felt like her whole personality had done a 360. It felt like Blossom was just waiting to throw herself onto something. It was much like Buttercup's mindset. Fight now, think later. And the weirdest part was that she didn't seem to care. So very little was keeping Blossom glued to her seat, even as her friends tried to engage her in some bets on who would win the first battle. She kept her eyes laser-focused on that arena, as some teachers set it up. She would be down there soon, once the third battle rolled around. And until then, she could only watch for the only reason she bothered to stay. To see Izuku's quirk in action. Oh, I really hope Deku wins this battle, Ochako said next to Blossom, her voice anxious. Of course he'll win. No way is he gonna lose to a 1C student, Minta snapped. Class divisions don't determine skill, however, Tenya noted, looking deep in thought. There's no telling how much his opponent has progressed with his quirk. We'll have to see how much of a threat Shinso really is. On the other side of Blossom, Buttercup snickered. You better pick up the slack, Bloss. Looks like Mr. Nerd Guy is doing his geek speech before you are. Blossom gave a half-handed shrug. In all honesty, she had already thought about her geek speech before Tenya even brought up his analysis. But even then, there was not much else to say. Izuku was going to win. Plain and simple. Instead, Blossom was wondering about something else. In their row, she could see Ojiro sitting in his seat. His face was darkened, chewing his fingernail in anticipation. It wasn't noticeable that everyone caught it, but it wasn't subtle. Ojiro had some sort of connection with this battle. He made that clear when he pulled Izuku aside to talk to him privately. What he said or why he was so concerned about this battle was making Blossom itch with overwhelming curiosity. But she would quickly find out the answer. Finally, after what felt like forever, the intercom broadcasted Present Mike's voice. "Apologies for the wait, everyone, but get excited people cause the final round is about to blast off." Once again, the crowd cheered, their claps rumbling the very seats. Now, before anything happens, I want to let y'all know that I won't be the only voice hyping the stadium up. Joining me in the announcer's booth, we have a very special guest, the one, the only Eraserhead. Instantly, Class 1 is straightened with the announcement, soon screaming in joy for their teacher. "It's Mr. Aizawa," Bubbles cheered, completely ecstatic. "No surprise that 1A's stealing the show right now. We're that class," Buttercup whooped. Meanwhile, Blossom simply blinked. "Aizawa's emceeing? Huh." Present Mike spoke again over the volume of Class 1A's cheers. "So, Aizawa, what are your juicy predictions on who's gonna win this battle?" After he said that, Aizawa's monotone voice echoed throughout the stadium. "I won't disclose that as of now. I'm expecting an unbiased viewpoint on what student is able to succeed." "Awa, you're no fun. The best part of battles is placing your bets. But let me not get into that. Let's bring out the first pair, shall we?" At this, everyone was jumping, the excitement in the room electric enough to shock someone. Even Blossom sat at the edge of her seat, nearly standing as she peered at the arena. Finally, after a few moments, two students walked out from their entrances, entering the stadium floor. On the screens above, shots of the two students were visible for the whole crowd to see. And on one screen was Izuku's nervous face. In one corner, we have a student with Class 1A, who's been at the center of every explosive event. Here comes Izukumidoriya. At this, most of Class 1A jumped up to cheer, including two of the girls. "Go Izuku," Bubbles shouted. "You can do it, Deku," Ochako added encouragingly. Although Bubbles and Buttercup were cheering, Blossom remained seated, a small eager smile tugging at her lips. "Come on, Midoriya, don't let me down," she whispered. After that, the screen switched to the opponent, stepping onto the stage, and to Blossom's shock, it was that same purple-haired boy, further confirmed by Present Mike. And in the other corner, we have a bright student from the general course department. Even though he isn't in a hero course at the moment, nothing's gonna stop him from stealing the show. It's Hitoshi Shinso. Shinso, the fated rival in Midoriya's first battle, and the sole judge of whether or not Izuku will pass on. Fewer people cheered as enthusiastically as they did with Izuku, as people clapped. However, Blossom noticed a shift in Ojiro's demeanor. He seemed to tense up, gritting his teeth. It was like he and Shinso had a personal grudge. Blossom set her sights on the stage, watching patiently. This is going to be interesting. As the two stood on stage, inside the bright red circle painted on the floor, Midnight climbed onto the stage as well. "Now, if you guys aren't familiar," she instructed the two. "The two ways to win is by knockout or elimination. If one of you happens to set a foot outside the red border on this stage, you're eliminated. As long as you stay in this circle and don't try to murder each other, anything goes. So, let's keep this a clean fight, okay boys?" The two students only replied with a nod, their eyes already set on each other. As Izuku tensed his fingers with anxiety, Shinso seemed a lot calmer, almost smirking. "All right, then. Begin," Midnight announced, swiping down her feathered baton. As she said, "begin," the stadium fell into an uneasy silence. The two began to pace the stage slowly, their eyes not leaving each other. Nobody striked or even made a move other than walking. Finally, Shinso broke it. "So, you're from the famed Class 1A. Izuku says nothing. "I've seen your classmates in the festival so far, and I have to say, they don't live up to my expectations at all. I expected more power from our supposed future heroes," he continued, almost spitting out the words. As everyone watched, Buttercup rolled her eyes. "Are you kidding me? Is this guy gonna yap the whole time?" "SHH," Blossom suddenly hissed, focused on the arena. Meanwhile, neither Izuku or Shinso made a move, continuing to circle each other in a standoff. Strangely, Izuku was adamant on not saying anything. "Especially your friend. To back out of the last round like that? He must be the weakest link in your group, HM." After Shinso said that, the energy Izuku was displaying seemed to instantly change. Although he didn't speak, he suddenly stopped walking, staring at Shinso with a look of indignation. Whatever Shinso meant, it hit Izuku on the mark. And as he did, Blossom could see Ajiro in the corner of her eye tense up. Shinso was talking about him, and he wasn't done. It's a shame, really, to pull such a cowardly move. So many people wanted to get to this point, yet he gave it all up. It really makes you wonder how a pathetic loser like him ever got into the hero department at all. Suddenly, Shinso was interrupted by a loud yell. "Don't you dare talk about him like that, you hear me?" Izuku had finally set off towards Shinso, his fists balled and his expression clearly showing rage. The girls tensed, anticipating the first blow with mixed emotions. That is, until Izuku froze. It wasn't at all like the controlled pause of his walking like earlier. This one was like he was suddenly restricted by something, almost falling over with it. He was completely frozen, not a single muscle moving. Not even his face moved, stuck in a stupefied state. He stood like that for long, agonizing seconds, causing everyone in the crowd to murmur. "The hell? What's wrong with him?" Buttercup exclaimed, squinting. "Don't tell me he's got cold feet already." "It's like he's frozen," Bubbles added, frowning. "It's freaking me out." Blossom leaned forward in her seat, looking at the screen that showed Izuku, and on it showed his suddenly vacant eyes, a key indicator of her growing theory. "Shinso's quirk," she suddenly gasped. Immediately, people turned to her. "His quirk?" Ochako squeaked. "What kind of quirk is it, then, Ribbit?" Suyu asked. As if answering her question, Present Mike spoke over the intercom. "Amazing, folks. What you're witnessing here is none other than Shinso's quirk. The power to completely control his opponent. To be more specific," Aizawa clarified, "Shinso has the ability to brainwash his target." "No way," Buttercup whispered before her eyes brightened. "That's sick." After she said that, some people in the crowd began to cheer enthusiastically, enraptured by the quirk. Meanwhile, Shinso's smirk was now a grin, soaking in the applause. "I truly wish I could have seen more of your heroic quirk, Midoriya. But I am happy to end this." With his words, Izuku suddenly straightened, his moves almost robotic. Commanded by a mental influence, Izuku turned around and slowly shuffled towards the ring around the arena, ready to step out of bounds. At this, the crowd went into an uproar, either cheering or yelling at Izuku to snap out of it. Class wanna happen to be the latter? "Come on, Deku, snap out of it," Ochako yelled. "You can't pussy out now," Buttercup screamed. Bubbles looked on, worried. "I don't understand. Why can't he break it?" Tenya grimaced, conflicted. "Not much can break a brainwashing, no matter how much you want to win." As he said this, Blossom's stomach tightened. Was Izuku really going to lose to this? To some random student from the general course? It seemed almost ridiculous to think that someone Blossom geared to fight with no mercy could lose to something as little as a slip of the tongue. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe Izuku wasn't this strong guy, she thought he. His fingers twitched. Suddenly, a huge shockwave pushed out from Izuku, cracking the stage beneath him. The aftershock was noticeable, carrying throughout the arena with a rumble and a gust of wind. Everyone's cheers quieted at the sudden event, shocked into silence. Then, Izuku gasped for air, almost leaning out of bounds. He was just by the border of the arena, one step from being knocked out. But he seemed to break the brainwashing just in time. And as Izuku turned around, his two fingers seemed to be bruised and possibly broken. No one seemed to expect it, especially Shinso, as he stared at him in shock. "Why you?" he sputtered. Izuku looked at his fingers, and for a minute, he looked surprised too. Yet, the look was completely smothered by his expression morphing into a crazed look as he glanced at Shinso. It seemed like the battle was heating up now. "Looks like you broke through my quirk," Shinso finally said, composing himself a little. "Mind telling me how you did that?" Silence. You know, don't you? Don't tell me, he told you." Shinso started to look aggravated, his cool slipping for the first time in the match, especially as Izuku began to approach him silently. Of course he did, that incapable loser wouldn't have let it slide. Izuku grabbed Shinso by the shoulders, taking the latter and the crowd by shock. "Don't touch me," Shinso suddenly yelled. Izuku glared before pushing Shinso hard, shoving him across the arena. As he was trapped by Izuku's hold, Shinso threw hard punches. "Why are you acting like this? Fight me." Once again, silence from everyone else in the room. "You bastard, you think you're strong?" Shinso yelled, punching hard and trying to dig his feet into the ground. "Why don't you punch me back then, huh? I'm at a disadvantage, right? If you're such a hero, use your quirk." Everyone watched in bated silence, and before she knew it, Blossom was standing, her eyes wide. "You'll never understand. That heroic quirk you have, and you're too arrogant to use it. I can't believe you were blessed with a quirk like that and you won't even use it." Finally, they were at the edge, locked in a tussle. All the while, Izuku was quiet, struggling as Shinso punched him. Until suddenly, he grabbed Shinso's fist just as he threw it. "Shut up." Before Shinso could react, Izuku threw him over his shoulder and slammed him into the ground hard. Dust picked up around them, making it hard to see. But as it cleared, it showed Shinso laying on the ground, over the red border. After a few seconds, Midnight spoke loudly. "Midoriya wins the match." At her call, the crowd erupted into cheers. All of Class 1 jumped up, overjoyed with their classmates' win, and, as the girls came to realize, Blossom cheered the loudest. Completely ecstatic, Blossom jumped for joy, clapping wildly. She seemed to ignore everything else, just staring at the arena and cheering. "I knew it," she finally declared, as her cheering stopped. Buttercup smiled as she did. "Huh. I knew you were placing bets. Why didn't you cash us in? We could have betted on some money." "Well, we were all rooting for Deku, weren't we?" Bubbles giggled. Ochako sighed with relief. "Thank goodness for that. I was worried for a second." As the cheering subsided, the two walked off stage. Meanwhile, Shinso managed to get up, looking very dejected. As he walked off, he looked at the crowd for a long time before smiling again, Blossom noted. Looks like he got over his loss quickly, despite the rant he was having earlier. Despite Blossom's poking curiosity about Shinso, it was mostly overshadowed by her joy for Izuku winning. But as she watched him exit the stage, she saw All Might greet him at the entrance. They then engaged in a serious conversation as All Might guided Izuku away. It was only then did Blossom's joy fade. "That battle was weird," she finally said, all her enthusiasm gone. "Eh?" Buttercup exclaimed, thrown off by Blossom's switch in mood. Blossom sat back down, thinking hard. Shinso had mentioned it in the battle, but it begs attention. Izuku hadn't used his powers at all during the match. Bubbles blinked. "Now that you bring it up, he only used it when he broke Shinso's brainwashing. But that broke his fingers. His power may be too strong to use." "Yeah, the heck's up with that?" Buttercup remarked. "Plus, imagine the amount of brain strength you'd need to break a mind control. His powers must be jacked." Blossom nodded, taking their notes into consideration. Her sisters had very good points. Izuku somehow broke the mind control with ease, and even without using his powers, he managed to win against Shinso, who was using his power. That didn't sit right with her. "I gotta use the bathroom," Blossom sighed, suddenly getting up. Buttercup didn't seem to care, as she threw a glance at her. "Well, hurry up, 'cause the next battle's gonna start soon." Meanwhile, Bubbles seemed to be more reluctant to let her sister leave. But Blossom was already making her way down the row and out of the section, just as Bubbles stood up. "What's wrong with you, Blossom?" she whispered to herself. She really didn't have to go to the bathroom. She had wanted to find Izuku and All Might. Granted, Blossom had no idea where they could be. The stadium was large, and she spent her time pacing through the corridors. Yet, she wanted to catch them anyway before Izuku would join the rest of the class. Blossom didn't even want to talk to him. She only wanted to catch just a glimpse of his and All Might's conversation, even just a few words. Perhaps then, she would be given some insight on the mysteries of their relationship and put her nagging curiosity at ease. After a few moments, Blossom got what she wished for, a conversation. Except it wasn't from the hero-student duo she was expecting. Shoto. Blossom immediately stopped, shocked by the gruff voice. She was approaching a turn in the hallway, and the voice was just beyond that. She felt tempted to go around the corner and see, but immediately, her danger senses were telling her something different. Hide. Quickly, Blossom rushed to the wall with silent footsteps, pressing herself up against it. and as an extra precaution, she hovered above the ground a little so that she didn't make noise. After that, Blossom did all she could in that situation. Listen. What do you want, father? Blossom tensed. Todoroki? Don't talk that way to me, young man. Not after you completely embarrassed me out there. As Blossom listened to the gruff voice, her eyes widened with realization. That voice, it could only be Endeavor. She heard Todoroki scoff. It seems like anything I do embarrasses you these days. Shoto. Endeavor's voice turned cold. You need to end this. End what? End this. After that, Blossom heard a loud thump, almost like someone was punching a wall. End this childish rebellion of yours. Endeavor growled. You're bringing disgrace to the Todoroki name. Despite the threat in his father's voice, Todoroki seemed like his usual calm self. How, exactly? Enlighten me, father. Don't play dumb, you little brat. This little game you're playing is crippling your potential. Your insistence on defying me is stopping you from your goal of surpassing All Might. And because of that, you lost to some little kindergarten child. Blossom closed her eyes, steadying herself on the wall beside her. This was about her, of course. Your blindness to the events of this festival isn't something I want to entertain, father. Todoroki sighed, his voice noticeably tighter. I have not lost. Not in the race and not in the cavalry battle. Every time, I have outmaneuvered many contenders. I plan to win this festival, and I will only be using my ice to do so. Blossom tensed at the declaration. It seemed that every time Todoroki and his dad had talks like this, it all boiled down to that. To Todoroki defying his father. Him using his mother's ice powers was his way of doing it. And Endeavor seemed to realize that just as much. Deny me all you want, Shoto. But, let me warn you, you will have to turn to my guidance eventually. The ice you so often overuse cannot help you win every battle you face. It can only carry you so far, and just like your mother, ice breaks easily. With that chilling statement, there were suddenly footsteps as Endeavor left. As his shadow grew on the wall of Blossom's corridor, she quickly shot to the ceiling, pressing herself to it as much as possible. As Endeavor entered the hallway, he remained oblivious to her on the ceiling, his face stormy with rage. And once he was gone entirely, all Blossom heard was an angry yell on the other side of the wall. Dang, that took you a while. Why were you gone for so long? Buttercup asked. Blossom sat down, her expression vacant. I couldn't find a bathroom. Despite her weird behavior, no one seemed to notice. I know, right? It's so hard to find one. This place is like a maze, Ochako groaned. Bubbles looked at Blossom with concern. You can hold it though, right? She was cut off by a sudden glare from Blossom. Stunned, Bubbles closed her mouth, her shoulders drooping. But it was when Blossom turned to Bubbles that she noticed everyone in her row looking at something behind her. Deku, you made it just in time, Ochako exclaimed, brightening. Immediately, Blossom froze, turning her head back around. Izuku was back, making his way towards them with a smile. Hey guys, he said softly. Instantly, most of Class 1A was up on their feet. Bro, you killed it out there, Buttercup congratulated. We're so happy you won, Tenure remarked. Good job, Ribbit, Tsuyu complimented. Izuku's smile widened at their approval. Thanks, that means a lot. After that, he walked into their aisle as people patted him on the back. As he moved past Blossom, all she could do was stare, unable to form any words. Finally, she closed her eyes with a sigh as he sat down, his classmates congratulating him still. Yeah, good job, she murmured to herself. After she said that though, Buttercup's eyes widened as she looked at the arena. SHH, the second battle's starting, Buttercup suddenly gasped. Sure enough, the intercom came on, as the crowd grew quiet. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the second battle is about to begin, President Mike yelled. Without further ado, let's bring out our next duo. At his words, two new people entered the arena. This time, they were both Class 1A students. In one corner, we have a student who knows a thing or two about laying sticky traps for his opponents. Give it up for Hanta Siro. The crowd cheered, especially some of the boys in Class 1A. That's my boy. Go get him, Siro, Denki cheered. Meanwhile, on the screens above, Siro was smiling wide, waving to everyone without a care in the world. He seemed overjoyed to finally be on stage, about to show his skill to the crowd. The complete and polar opposite of Todoroki's attitude. And in the other corner, we have the prodigy child of the number 2 hero and a formidable contender for the top spot. It's shototodoroki. As people clapped, Todoroki didn't even seem to acknowledge them. His head was hung, adamant on keeping his gaze at the ground. Meanwhile, his fists and even his jaw were clenched. No one seemed to know the reason behind that except for Blossom. But that didn't stop Izuku from frowning at the sight before whispering to himself. What is he? Before the whisper could be acknowledged by Blossom, however, the battle was already commencing. Let's keep this a fair fight, boys. Midnight told the two before waving her baton. Begin. Unlike the first battle, it didn't take long for the action to begin. Without hesitation, Zero punched his 2 arms in the air, and long strands of tape came flying out. They ensnared Todoroki easily, trapping him in their grasp. Once he was trapped, Zero spun around, taking Todoroki with him. The latter flew around the arena, getting closer and closer to being thrown out of bounds. As this happened, the crowd cheered on the sight, including Blossom's sisters. But it was at that exact moment that Todoroki finally raised his head. Apologies. After the word left his mouth, the world shook. In the blink of an eye, ice blasted from Todoroki in a blaze of intense cold. Before Zero could react, it was on him. Yet the cascade of ice continued, rising high to the crowd's level and piercing the very sky. Screams and gasps erupted from some parts of the crowd until the ice finally stopped growing. It was a wall of pure ice. Completely overtaken by shock, Blossom let out a squeak. She couldn't believe her eyes as she stared at the wall. Neither could Bubbles and Buttercup. What the F? Buttercup started to whisper. Down below, Todoroki had broken free from the tape, which was turned into mere chunks of ice. Midnight, caught in the middle of the blast, shivered intensely with her body half frozen. Zero. She managed to bite out, turning towards the boy. See, can you move? Zero, meanwhile, was completely frozen, glued to the ice wall itself. Only his head was unfrozen, and his face was full of shock and fear. Finally, he shook his head slowly. No. After a moment, Midnight nodded before doing her best to compose herself and raising her hand. Todoroki wins the match. This time, it took longer for the crowd to clap. But once they started, they were cheering wildly. Some even congratulated Zero, shouting, "Nice try." Blossom couldn't even cheer as she watched Todoroki approach Zero. I'm really sorry, he sighed, putting a hand on the ice wall. I went a little overboard. After that, a pulse of heat came from Todoroki's hand, and the ice began to dissolve, freeing Zero from the ice prison. As he melted the ice away, Blossom looked at the screen showing his face. He was sad. Immensely so. Holy shit. This guy is nuts. Buttercup mumbled, for once not showing any eagerness. He's kind of scary, Bubbles added. Blossom slowly nodded. Yeah. Everyone seemed to be having the same line of thought. Even present Mike took a little longer to gather his bearings. Well, there you have it, y'all. Shototodoroki is a force to be reckoned with, just like his old man. Blossom grimaced slightly. There was no lie about that. As much as Todoroki didn't use his fire, he still resorted to the ruthless nature instilled in him by Endeavor. His rivalry with his father ran deep, but his instincts stayed the same. It was truly nothing like Blossom had ever encountered. Not even in her home world. There's a chance we have to take a longer intermission this time. The ice needs to be cleaned up. Aizawa suggested, his voice as monotone as ever. All right, Present Mike agreed. After that, we move on to our third battle, which is... As he spoke, Blossom lifted her head up and looked to the side, meeting Bubbles' increasingly nervous eyes. The two Wonder Girls, Momoko and Miyako. The Powerpuff Girls rarely fought each other. Yes, they have had sisterly fights back home. There was no doubt that the girls resorted to fighting among themselves if their ideals clashed. Bubbles' hardcore rebellion was enough proof of that. Not to mention, in this world, they often had spars and training. But all those times, their fights were rarely a public spectacle, especially with the circumstances they were in right now, with half the world watching who will screw up. and the fact that they were matched up in the very first round seemed like a cruel trick from the universe to Bubbles. All this time, she had been eager to show the world what she was made of in this festival. So far, she's been doing a pretty good job of that, with top 5 in the race and being on the winning team of the cavalry battle. And yet she finds herself in a position where her spot in the festival is jeopardized by her sister, who is becoming increasingly aggravated by something. So as she prepared herself in the corridor, trying to psyche herself up, Bubbles tried to hold onto her sports festival high as long as possible. "Yo, Bubs." Bubbles squeaked at the sudden voice before turning around to see Buttercup approaching. "Oh, Buttercup," she sighed in relief. Buttercup eyed her as she stopped walking. "You seem weirdly on edge." Bubbles gulped before looking up. "I'm not, it's just, this sucks." Buttercup gritted her teeth. "I know, don't get me started. I mean putting you two together in the first round? That means one of us is getting knocked out early. They did that crap on purpose. In fact, where's the teachers, 'cause I'm gonna beat the shit out of them." "No, Buttercup, I mean Blossom," Bubbles suddenly shouted. Buttercup stopped her rant, surprised by the outburst. "Wah, Blossom?" she asked, confused. Bubbles was breathing hard, wiping at her face. "She seemed sick of me ever since this festival started. She's so happy to be fighting against Izuku and Todoroki. And yet, she keeps ignoring us. You noticed it too, right? She only needs our help when it benefits her and not us. It's like we're being used just to help her, like we're minions or something." Buttercup was quiet, listening to Bubbles' rant, and slowly she nodded. "Yeah, now that you mention it, she's been running around trying to fight everyone while ignoring us. I'm not even doing that." Bubbles deflated slightly, her eyes growing sad. "We promised each other that we would show everyone who we are. It didn't matter who won or not. Just that we were capable and that we can prove everyone wrong. But I don't think Blossom wants to do that anymore." Buttercup sighed. "It's the fight in her. Once she puts her mind to something, nothing can stop that girl." Bubbles nodded before looking at her sister with pleading eyes. "Buttercup, what do you think I should do?" Buttercup's eyes widened before she glared. Suddenly, she grabbed Bubbles' shoulders and shook her. "What should you do? Bubbles, come on now. You know damn well what you should do." Bubbles jerked back, surprised. Then, she thought about it for a minute. Finally, her eyes narrowed. "Don't let her win," she whispered. Buttercup nodded in approval as she shook her again. "If our dear leader is looking for a fight, for God's sake, Bubbles, give her one. If this is the only battle you're fighting, you better draw it the fuck out. Don't make it easy for her, you hear me?" Bubbles nodded. "Okay." "What was that?" "I hear you." "Say it louder." "I hear you." "That's the spirit," Buttercup whooped as she let her go with a sharp smack on her shoulders. "Now give Blossom hell." "Right," Bubbles shouted. With her sister's encouragement, Bubbles felt her anxiety melt away. With a quick tug on her pigtails, Bubbles rushed down the hallway, heading towards the opening leading to the stadium. Once she got there, Bubbles breathed in and out slowly. It didn't matter to her if she was fighting her sister. All that mattered was giving these people a fight they've never seen. "Let's show them who we are." Bright light blinded Blossom as she stepped into the stadium fully. As she did, the loud noises and the celebrations greeted her, a jarring experience to the one she had just moments ago in the locker room. She was alone with her thoughts, shoving down any she had about Todoroki and Izuku. Blossom couldn't focus on that now. All she could do was look forward to the fight she was ironically dreading. "I hope you guys are ready," President Mike's voice echoed through the stadium. "Because we're on our way to the third battle. Let's bring out the next pair you've been waiting for." Joyful screams and shouts were coming from all sides, overloading Blossom's senses before she shook her head. She tugged at the bow in her hair, which she took off her head and instead tied around her ponytail to get rid of the distraction. "Head in the game, Bloss," she whispered to herself. As she looked up, Blossom saw her opponent already waiting. Bubbles stood in the arena proudly, her head raised high, and unsurprisingly, she was smiling, happy to see her sister. If only Blossom could say the same. In one corner, President Mike announced, "We have a wonder girl from Class 1A. With a bright smile and a bubbly attitude, she's ready to rock this stage. It's Miyako Utonium." The crowd cheered wildly, clearly eager to see Bubbles. There were even some chants of Miyako, Miyako. Meanwhile, Bubbles smiled and waved excitedly to the stands. And in the other, we have yet another Wonder Girl from Class 1A. A fiery redhead who's been a first-place princess in every event so far. Will she be able to defend that title? It's Momoko Utonium. Once again, cheering came from the stands. But as Blossom raised her head to look at the crowd, she noticed something. Some were clapping, yet others merely sat in their seats with their arms crossed, their faces painted with disapproval. Even here, Blossom couldn't avoid those judging faces. The thought made her teeth clench and her stomach flip. Unwillingly, she averted her eyes to Bubbles, who had stuck out a hand. "Best of luck, Blossom," she whispered. Blossom stared at the hand before glancing away. "G-luck." Bubbles lowered her hand, her smile faltering. That is, until her lips pressed together and her eyes narrowed. Midnight then stood between the two, looking down at both of them. "Okay, let's keep this a clean fight, girls." Blossom glanced at her before crossing her arms. "I'll make it quick, how about that?" Bubbles almost flinched at the words. Midnight smiled a little at the declaration. "Cute. I like your confidence," she purred. Finally, Midnight stepped back and waved down her baton, saying the word that both girls have been dying to hear. "Begin." Suddenly, a loud whoosh and a flash of color covered the arena. Both girls had wasted no time, as both blasted off towards each other. Now, they were locked in a charged clash, their hands interlocked and their faces inches from each other. Until Bubbles threw a kick, forcing the two apart with a large amount of force. Blossom skidded back, before steadying herself a few feet away from the border. She flexed her fingers, straightening at the same time Bubbles did. All signs of a smile on Bubbles' face had disappeared, as she matched Blossom's energy and expressions, and they only intensified as she settled into a fighting position and flicked her fingers back in a gesture meant to beckon Blossom over. Annoyed, Blossom put her hands together. Instantly, a sphere of pink energy materialized before Blossom grabbed it, wound up, and chucked it at Bubbles. Meanwhile, Bubbles stayed rooted to the spot as the pink ball fast approached. It was only when it got into striking distance that Bubbles dodged. Suddenly, Bubbles blasted into the air, her blue energy trail left in her place just before the ball collided and neutralized with the energy trail left behind. She flew high into the air before changing course, flying down fast towards Blossom like a missile. As she did, her outstretched hands began to spark with electricity and curled into fists. Blossom quickly jumped away, letting Bubbles fly past. But as she did, Bubbles instantly changed course, chasing Blossom. Quickly, with incredible speed, Blossom ran around the arena, with Bubbles hot on her tail. This went on for some time before Blossom suddenly yanked herself out of Bubbles' path, too quick for Bubbles to maneuver. Suddenly, Blossom was right beside her, and her fist was raised. That was what Bubbles saw before she received a stunning blow to the cheek. Thrown off by the attack, Bubbles crashed into the ground, rolling away a fair distance. But before she could react, Blossom raced towards her, jumping high into the sky, and coming down with an energy-fueled punch. "Give up." Eyes widening, Bubbles rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the bullet punch that tremendously shook the ground. Blossom's head snapped in her direction before lunging at her sister. Once again, Bubbles dodged and got up on her feet, raising her fists. "Make me," she shouted with equal fervor. Blossom glared before shouting a war cry and colliding with Bubbles. The two were now throwing punches and kicks, sparring with bicolored energy and with burning glares. The crowd was going wild around them, loud voices ringing in their ears, and yet nothing distracted them from their duel. Each of them tanked their superpowered hits all while trying to weaken the other, locked in a fearsome boxing match. Until finally it all ended with Blossom suddenly grabbing Bubbles' fists. "Why are you doing this?" she yelled. Before Bubbles could even answer or say anything, Blossom kicked her hard in the stomach, all while holding her still. "You wanted me to show everyone how great we are, right? I'm the leader that bears that responsibility, to give us the glory and respect we deserve," Blossom continued, her face twisted with rage. Suddenly, Blossom grabbed the back of Bubbles' head, spun her around, and threw her to the ground. She knelt down, holding her sister there. "I can't do that," she hissed as Bubbles struggled. If you don't, let me win. Stoop. The sudden scream from Bubbles echoed like a gunshot, her sonic voice rattling Blossom. Stunned, Blossom let go just as Bubbles whirled around and threw a punch to her stomach. As the hit connected, Blossom was blasted a few feet away. Bubbles got up, her pigtails messy and her eyes almost looking crazed. Enough, I've had it. Blossom propped herself up, clutching her gut. All this time, it's always been about you. Why are you so happy to push me out of the match? Gritting her teeth, Blossom was suddenly on her feet, running to Bubbles to attack. But before she could, Bubbles jetted towards her, grabbed her, and blasted off, dragging Blossom along. It's like you want to see me lose. To see us lose, Bubbles ranted as they flew. It's like you don't care. For you, it's not the Powerpuff Girls versus everyone else, but everyone versus you. Finally, Blossom tore Bubbles off her, and the two floated in the air, high above the arena. What's going on, Blossom? Do you not want to show everyone how great we are? Or do you just want the glory for yourself? She demanded, her voice cracking at the end. Blossom flinched at the outburst, breathing heavily. Bubbles, No, forget it. I don't want to talk right now. Bubbles snapped, her eyes glowing red. You want this fight to end so badly? We're ending it. Blossom's eyes widened, knowing what's going to happen, just as lasers shot from Bubbles' eyes. Quickly, she called up her laser vision and shot it at Bubbles. The two beams crashed, pushing against each other in equal strength. Come on, Blossom, come at me, Bubbles yelled. Those very words motivated Blossom further, as she narrowed her eyes and intensified the lasers. The lasers fought against each other for some time, until finally, Blossom's lasers overpowered Bubbles's, and the two lasers were pushed onto her, resulting in an explosion. But as a smoke cloud bloomed, Bubbles emerged, flying at Blossom. Bullet punch. With the encouraging shout, Bubbles wound up and threw a punch straight into Blossom's cheek. As she flew to the side, her mind completely blanked with the punch, including her instinct to fly. So, Blossom dropped a little before she started to fall to the ground below. As she did, her vision and her surroundings seemed to tunnel, as if she was falling into a deep dark pit. Blossom couldn't stop herself in her descent as she blinked up at the sky. This was how things were going to end. Eliminated from the match, down and out before she could ever hope to move on. At least, that's what she thought faintly before she suddenly felt a weight press against her. She looked down to see Bubbles hugging her, falling with her. You're our leader, Blossom. Be one. Before Blossom could even react, Bubbles quickly let go before shoving her hard. After she did, Blossom finally gathered her bearings and flipped upwards, just as she reached the ground. She finally landed hard on her feet, stumbling before falling on her butt. Gasping for air, Blossom tried to steady herself, blinking hard. After a few moments, her head finally cleared, and she looked at the ground, knowing her time was up. But then, she noticed she was still inside the border. Blossom was suddenly on her feet standing, completely taken by shock. And on the other side, Bubbles was sitting, her arm resting on her knee and smiling softly. She was past the borderline. Blossom couldn't believe her eyes, refusing to accept the meaning of what she saw. But soon, midnight confirmed it for the whole audience to hear. Miyako has been knocked out of the ring, Momoko wins. Before Blossom could register the announcement, people were cheering again. And even Bubbles was clapping softly, slowly standing. Just like the previous rounds of the festival, it all felt unreal as Blossom took in what was happening. But as she looked at the stands, something she always wanted started to happen. What was once faces of contempt and ridicule were now faces of surprise and immense respect. Even the tough-looking people were clapping politely. And a lot more students were clapping and cheering, her sister and a certain green-haired boy cheering a lot louder than the others. It was happening. People were realizing how amazing they were, and it was all because of Bubbles. Quickly, Blossom looked at her sister, who was approaching her slowly. "Be Bubbles," she whispered. "I'm so sore." "Can I still hold you on that promise?" Bubbles interrupted, her voice weirdly sharp. Blossom's eyes widened. "What?" "I need you to kick ass in this tournament, Blossom. No matter what anybody else throws at you and how crazy they happen to be. Let me be the only one in this festival who can meet you on your level." Bubbles went quiet for a brief moment before opening her arms up with a big smile. I think that's a pretty good way to prove how great we are. Blossom's mouth quivered before entering Bubbles' open arms and holding her tight. Of course, I promise. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 6. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author PeriwinkleFrog on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.